If you would like to earn CPE credit for listening to the show, visit earmarkcpe.com/FPA. Download the app, take a short quiz, and get your CPE certificate. If you would like to earn continuing education credit for your FP&A certification from the Association of Finance Professionals for listening to the show, go to the show notes for details on how to earn the credit. Finally, if you enjoy listening to FP&A Today, please go to your podcast platform of choice, click the subscribe button, and leave a rating and review of the show. And now, on to the show.
From Data Rails, this is FP&A Today.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to FP&A Today. I am your host, Paul Barnhurst, aka the FP&A Guy. FP&A Today is brought to you by Data Rails, the financial planning and analysis platform for Excel users. Every week, we welcome a leader from the world of financial planning and analysis. Today, we are delighted to be joined by Amy Omand. Amy, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Paul.
Yeah, we're really excited to have you here with us. So a little bit about Amy. Amy comes to us from Oakland, California. She earned her bachelor's in accounting from Georgetown and her MBA from Berkeley. She has her CPA license and has been running her own business, 7 Seat Consulting, supporting nonprofits for the last year. And so we're really excited to have her here. And we're going to start with a fun question we like to ask everybody. We start off the show with these days. What was the most challenging or most difficult budgeting experience you've ever had?
Yes, you are certainly starting with the hard-hitting questions, those tough times that we have had with budgeting. The thing that popped into my head was actually from the past when I was working at a for-profit company at Dreyer's Ice Cream. There was a period of time that I was involved in the capital steering committee where I was helping to pull together the financial analysis for any new ice cream line. And I still remember the marketing folks coming to me and saying, what ROI do I need to get my project approved? So all of that was sort of indicative of folks, sort of starting at the end point and thinking that they could backwards map, the financial analysis needed in order to get their project approved. So it was interesting to navigate those times and sort of put together a true financial analysis when you recognize that everyone sort of had their own needs, in the budgeting process.
Yeah, it reminds me of the time when someone asked me, "What do you want the accrual to be?"
Right.
I was like, I want it to be what it's a realistic estimate of what we think's going to happen that we can support. And what they were asking me is, how much do we need to bring in to hit our budget? Because we want to save the rest for next year.
Right.
That was the implied question, kind of like, okay, just tell me what ROI I need to get to and I'll engineer a case that I get there.
Yeah, exactly. And it's difficult when people want to start at the end rather than, the beginning. Kind of, I'm a true believer in bottoms up budgeting, zero-based budgeting, sort of, yes, you do have to know where you need to be, but you got to build up the assumptions, from the detail, from the ground up to actually have it be a valid analysis and, get the business going in the right direction.
Yeah, agree. Anytime you start with, okay, we got to get 12%, and you put together the case to get to 12.5, whether it makes sense or not, you just get yourself in trouble. I know I've seen it more than once. So what was the key takeaway from that experience? What was the learning?
Yeah, well, that the learning about kind of doing the bottoms up budgeting, kind of always needing to start from, the true assumptions, but also just kind of the people aspect of budgeting is always there. In this case, the marketing folks, they had their grand ideas to the new packaging or the new ice cream line. So they really wanted that to happen. The engineers, wanted the most amount of money they could spend on their new, production line and all of that. So the management of people's expectations is really salient in any budgeting exercise. And sometimes those of us, I know I am an introvert, love to be, in my spreadsheets, sort of performing the analysis, but you also have to be out there with people and kind of understanding their needs and wants and navigate within that context.
Yeah, I like how you said navigate because there's definitely a lot of navigation because almost always the needs or the wants are much bigger than the dollars, right? They
Right.
may say it's needs, and then you have that, okay, what's really a need and what can we afford? So it's a lot of back and forth for sure.
Definitely.
So, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and just your background, how you ended up where you're at today?
Yeah, well, I feel like numbers and accounting have kind of always been in my blood, my background. My grandfather was actually an accountant for his municipal energy company in Missouri a long time ago in the 1920s. My dad was a small businessman, so I just sort of felt like business and accounting and finance always kind of came naturally to me. When I was in undergrad, several years ago now. Got into the accounting program there and really loved my time learning about GAAP and sort of the rules of the road and ended up at PricewaterhouseCoopers for a few years while I got my CPA. I spent about 10 years in for-profit companies and then pivoted into nonprofits and social enterprise for the second half of my career. Most recently in organizations that are supporting K-12 education, which has really been meaningful to me to kind of take my financial analysis into the world of education, public education, improving outcomes for students, especially as I have two children who are now 17 and 13. I've been navigating them through Oakland Public Schools, so it's been really helpful for me to work with experts in the field that know a lot about education.
Yeah, I could totally see that where that would be helpful. And that's definitely an area where, we need to continue to improve. There's plenty of room for improvement, at least from my perspective of what I see having a daughter in K through 12 as well. So I can understand that. So, as you mentioned, you spent kind of the first 10 years working for large corporations and then made the move to nonprofit. What motivated that switch? What made you decide to go from profit to nonprofit?
Yeah, the pivot point, if you will, was my time at Berkeley when I was getting my MBA. I was in the evening and weekend program there while I was working at Dreyer's Ice Cream, who was acquired by Nestle during my tenure there, and I took a class called The Social Responsibility of Business, taught by Kelly McElhaney, and I was just really inspired by that course. I actually did my project on Dreyer's and presented to the CEO at the time. Did some work around our environmental impact, how we treat employees, as well as focused on profits and the bottom line. So it was a really eye-opening experience to kind of go through that process and realize that even for-profit organizations can, kind of have this multi-stakeholder approach. I knew at the time, while I was getting my MBA, I was like, should I pivot into, more ESG reporting and kind of get out of the day-to-day finance? But at the end of the day, I kind of realized organizations of all shapes and sizes need folks like me, with the skill set and the CPA that I bring. So I decided to stay, in my functional area of finance and just focus on working for organizations that mean something to me, that kind of have that social aspect. So after I left Dreyer's, I worked for an organization called Revolution Foods, which is a healthy school lunch company. I was their first finance hire, so it was really
Mm-hmm.
fun to take everything I learned from food manufacturing and CPG and bring it to a startup organization that was providing healthy school lunches primarily to Title I schools, schools that are supporting low-income kids
Mm-hmm.
across the nation. And we scaled from California all the way across the country during my time there. And so that was really meaningful. After that experience, I pivoted into nonprofits. And I was very lucky to find very strategic nonprofits to work for. I spent the last 8 years at New Schools Venture Fund. So New Schools was actually an initial investor in Revolution Foods. So that's where I first heard of them. New Schools is a venture philanthropy. So we would give grants to education organizations and new startup schools across the country. They were actually founded in the late 90s by venture capitalists from Kleiner Perkins, who had, the big vision of what if we could fund an organization that could seed innovation within K-12 education across the country, similar to how in the late 90s, the dot-com boom was going on. And, one of Kleiner Perkins' early investments was in a little company called Google. So the idea was, how can we seed innovation in K-12 education? So I spent 8 years there as their CFO and finance person, sort of helping to distribute money and learn from these education entrepreneurs that were really bringing, amazing innovation across the country.
Thank you for sharing your story. And I love how you brought that together, the love of the social side with your passion for finance and went, not for profit. I've always been a big fan of companies that have that social responsibility. One of the companies I follow a lot is Corp B companies, right? Which aren't quite not for profit, but they kind of sit a little bit in between, in the sense that they have a mission beyond just bottom line.
Right.
And so there's one here locally that I just love, and I've had their FP&A person on before, called Cotopaxi, and I've got to know the CEO a little bit. And love seeing the way they're trying to alleviate poverty. So I think it's great to see, whether it's not for profit, whether it's for profit, but just doing more to benefit society, that multi-stakeholder approach.
Yes, definitely.
You know what it is like. 13 different spreadsheets emailed out to 23 different budget holders. Multiple iterations, version control, errors, back and forth updates. You never really feel in control of the consolidation and collection process. Yep, I've been there. Stop, breathe. DataRels is the financial planning and analysis platform for Excel users. DataRels takes data from all your company's disparate sources. No organization is too complex, consolidating everything into one place, secured in the cloud. Now all your data finally talking to each other. Everything is automated back into your report in Excel. Cash flow, FX conversion, intercompany transactions, now automated and up to date. Drill down and variance analysis in seconds. Don't replace Excel, embrace Excel. Turn your Excel into a lean, mean FP&A machine. Find out more at www.datarels.com. So I think that's great. So today you run your own fractional CFO business, supporting nonprofits. How did you decide to start your own business? How did that come about?
Yeah, well, I decided to, after 8 years at New Schools Venture Fund, I left in early 2023. New Schools really gave me the opportunity to work with early stage entrepreneurs. So because we were giving seed funding to early stage nonprofits, as well as some for-profit organizations, had the opportunity to work with some of those entrepreneurs on some key questions they had about financial infrastructure, sort of what they needed as they were getting their organizations up and running. Because not only would New Schools provide money in the form of grants and investments, we would provide what we called management assistance, which was basically expertise on our staff or other consultants, sort of working with those organizations to support them as they grew. So that was really where I saw the need for organizations to have expertise such as mine, but not on a full-time basis. Early stage budgets, can't handle full-time CFO level support. So I decided to launch a fractional CFO organization, 7-seat consulting, where I have 5 clients right now, and I'm helping them as they are going from early stage to mid stage and helping to shape up their financials, get the right infrastructure in place, the right internal controls, maybe get them through their first audit, work on best practices for budgeting and forecasting, what they need from a funder reporting standpoint. So I saw the need in the marketplace. And the other aspect was sort of my own personal needs. I, as I mentioned, just love finance so much. And even at New Schools, which is a pretty sizable organization, as CFO, I was in charge of technology and sometimes HR and sort of other aspects of administration that I was like, I would love to really just focus on finance. So the fractional CFO model really meets my own needs where I can roll up my sleeves a bit more, support my clients. I'm seeing a bunch of new and different business models, which is really exciting for me. And then they get the benefit of sort of my expertise on that fractional basis.
Yeah, it sounds like it's a perfect fit for you and you're really enjoying it. So that's great. So I'm curious, right? You've spent a fair amount of time in not-for-profit, fair amount of time in the for-profit sector. What are some of the biggest similarity and differences between the two when it comes to finance?
Yeah. Well, yes, I would love to talk about both similarities and differences. And I love the fact that you mentioned, a lot of people say nonprofit and they think no profit, but you articulated it is not for profit, which really means that nonprofits just don't have profit as their primary driver. It's a tax designation that basically the IRS says if you are a not for profit, then that means your profits don't have to be taxed, which is lovely for those of us in this space. But it certainly does not mean that you are not making any profit because otherwise we wouldn't be sustainable. We have different gap terminology for that, adding to our net assets, for example. But one of the myths I'd love to just dispel is that nonprofits are not strategic. They're sort of not forward thinking. That we're always sort of scrapping for change and just trying to get things done. I've had the honor of working alongside and with organizations that are very strategically focused and they we're working within systems that can allow us to do new and different things and really focus on our mission in a nonprofit context in a very strategic way. So the ways in which they're different. One of the primary ways that they're different is in revenue recognition areas and primarily philanthropic revenue. So this is one thing in forecasting and budgeting that we can sometimes struggle with. Not all nonprofits have philanthropic revenue. Many of them do because of the tax benefits to donors. It can be really hard to budget and forecast for philanthropy if an organization is supported on a large part by philanthropic revenue in addition or solely by philanthropic revenue rather than earned income. Everyone sort of manages pipelines of philanthropy and you have, weighted averages of what you think, you're going to bring in and recognize as any year. But if one grant comes in, it's either going to be zero or 500,000, for example. So it can be kind of hard to budget in that context when uncertainty can creep in and you're just not sure. It's not like earned income where you can base it off of historicals and think about revenue run rates and things of that sort. The other aspect of philanthropy are restrictions. Many philanthropies like to place restrictions on how their money is spent. There's a big conversation in the nonprofit finance world about this in particular, and hopefully a movement toward less restrictions that funders are putting on their money. Many funders only want to see their money spent on program and not on things like overhead and operations and finance and accounting and things of that sort. The ironic thing is those restrictions actually cost more because we have to track them in a very detailed way from a financial standpoint. So, the hope is there's a term out there called trust-based philanthropy, where we are hoping that more philanthropic funders are going to adopt this approach where they're giving unrestricted funds. Mackenzie Scott has been a great trust-based philanthropist the last few years. She's actually given $14 billion to 1,600 nonprofits in the last few years. And she does it in a very open-ended, unrestricted way, which has been a game changer for many nonprofits. The last thing that I'll mention, just as far as differences, is sort of the culture within nonprofits that I have found is very collaborative. I know in for-profits, especially within finance and dealing with numbers, you need to be, you need to hold that information confidentially because of all sorts of different reasons. And in nonprofits, we publish our financial statements, our Form 990s publicly. Want to share our information publicly, as well as, we can kind of share across organizations what's working, and share things like our salaries and things of that sort on a more collaborative basis. So that's another difference that I've seen.
I really like that last one, the collaborative. It's nice that you can just be open and talk about things. We've all been there in finance roles where restructuring or whatever it might be, where you can't talk about anything, and it can be a challenge sometimes when you can't share certain things. That's nice. You have more opportunity to be open, and I totally agree with you about the restrictions. Having talked to some people and knowing a little bit about that, having worked for the government, contracting is where I started my career, right? What color of money was it, is what we call it. So, what appropriation did it come from? What bill? What could it be used for? What couldn't it be used for? And having to
Mm-hmm.
track all that just puts a lot of rules in the reporting side. I mean, obviously a little different than a not for profit, but similar type of thing in that it makes it very complex. So I can relate to that a little bit. And it was really tough to be like, all right, this money can be used this way, but can it be used that way? And asking those type of questions.
Yeah. And I know organizations I've worked with that have received government funding have to, track in that way. I mean, I can understand both sides of the coin. Like, obviously, as a citizen, I want to make sure any government funding sort of gets spent
Mm-hmm.
according to what it's intended to. But the amount of restrictions and sort of red tape. I mean, I've also worked with organizations who have said, I'm not going to accept any government funding because of the additional, 10 to 15% of costs it's going to take just to manage this grant. And,
Yep.
that's a valid response as well.
Well, it's just like the cost to go public, right? You got to manage all those rules. Similar type of thing. There can be a lot of regulation and rules to go with that. So I could see why they choose to do that. So, kind of shifting gears a little bit, can you talk about the typical budgeting process for a nonprofit? What is that like? Maybe some ways where it's similar and different, but just talk a little bit about that process.
Yeah. I think it is more similar than different. A lot of it is uh, setting out the plan for the budget, making sure you can kind of backwards map from whenever you need your end budget to be approved, making sure that you've got the tools set up, appropriately, kind of digging into last year's actuals, getting your budget model set up. Meeting with all of the key stakeholders within the organization, whether it's just the CEO or if it's a larger organization, sort of the heads of different departments, and setting the budgets up so that they can input their wishes, dreams, and plans for the future year into the budget model. I would generally then work on consolidating all of that information, taking it to higher management. And then we look at things from that 50,000 foot view. How does this budget, bottoms up budget, match to our expectations? What's the impact on our reserves? What is the likelihood of, if it's philanthropically revenue driven, sort of what's the likelihood of changes in revenue coming in. So we might need to go back to those budget owners and make some recommendations to decrease expenses. But then ultimately you're packaging it together for the ultimate approval, which is the nonprofit governance board at the end of the year. They'll meet, look at the budget, ask their key strategic questions, from their governance standpoint, to make sure that we as management have kicked all the tires and are happy with the way that our financial performance is laid out, and then approve the budget from there. as we go through the year, of course, budget to actual reporting is very key. And there may be times that we have to go back to the board if we need to make a budget adjustment. So maybe we've gotten a new grant that we didn't anticipate, and so that means we're going to increase our expenses. So sort of take them that real-time information as we go through the year to adjust the budgets.
Does that tend to be the biggest thing that causes budget adjustments, is some kind of unexpected revenue, either shortfall or addition? It's probably not on the expense side, but I'm guessing it's on a grant that comes through you didn't expect, or big grant that dries up earlier than you planned, or whatever it might be. Is those usually the big adjustments that have to happen?
Yes, exactly. And I know I always have a philosophy of because of the revenue uncertainty, we budget conservatively, because it always feels better for the budget adjustment to be, hey, we exceeded our revenue, and so therefore we can spend more money, rather than the other way around of, oh, we thought, we were going to bring in this much and it's coming in lower, so we have to cut. So that's always been a key underpinning of how I like to budget.
Yeah, I'm with you. Upside is always better than downside.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, what are the key metrics you look at not for profit? Like maybe take New School's venture fund, or just in general, since you've been a CFO, what are some of those key metrics that you like to look at?
Yeah. Well, at New Schools, we follow the OKR ways of budgeting, or sorry, goal setting, objective and key results. So our three main OKRs. The first one was fundraising. So we knew that we weren't going to meet our mission if we didn't fundraise the way that we needed to. The next two were not so much financial related, but I'll mention them. Venture satisfaction. We wanted to make sure all of our grantees that were obtaining our funding were happy with our support and our grant process in giving unrestricted funding, that they did not find it as an onerous process. And then employee satisfaction. So we would track the NPS of our employees. Getting back into more the financial metrics, though, in addition to those kind of top three OKRs, many of our financial discussions the last few years were on our reserve levels, and it was interesting because going back to kind of that conservative budgeting that we were talking about and always exceeding our revenue goals, we actually had several years of exceeding our revenue goals, and that led to our reserves growing. Mm-hmm. Which is great for an organization, but with an organization with a mission of seeding, and funding organizations in K-12 education, we did not want, our bank balances to get so high. We wanted the impact that we were looking for in the education space. So often our finance committee, we would talk about, okay, this is our base level of reserve, and let's make sure that we're spending, and not just saving this cash, for a rainy day, but kind of find that right Goldilocks level, if you will, of reserve level. And then the last thing I'll mention that, every nonprofit should track, even with high reserves, of just cash flow. That's not so much at New Schools, but more with my startup clients now. Cash is king. That's true. For profit, nonprofit, everywhere. You got to make sure, you have a good handle on your cash balances, the money coming in. Even at New Schools, we would find, there would be a dip in expenditures because we would give grants in the June timeframe. And many of our incoming funds would come in the December timeframe. Even donors still like to wait until December to give, based off of what their tax planners are. I was just going to say,
so they want to look at and go, okay, if I give this much, I get this much of a break. They can figure it out at the end of the year.
Exactly. So if you're only looking at your December 31 balances and saying, oh, everything's fine, you still need to look at how your cash is trending throughout the year, and make sure that that there's no hot spots anywhere, in any place that you might need to get a line of credit, for example, or investigate other means of cash flow.
Yeah, as you said, cash is king or queen. I mean, at the end of the day, if you don't have cash, it doesn't matter what the rest of the statements say.
Exactly.
I'm curious. Let's say we have an FP&A person. They spent most of their career in for-profit. They're looking to support, not for profit. They'd like to make that switch to a nonprofit. What's the skill sets that they might need to develop? Are there areas that are different that they need to be thinking about?
Yeah, I mean, all nonprofits need the skill sets that FP&A professionals have, kind of being analytic, being rational, being methodical, being able to put together an analysis, see what the result of that analysis is. Kind of what we were talking about at the beginning of the episode, kind of understanding the human nature aspect of money is a skill set that is definitely present in nonprofits, and that FP&A professionals should have. When you are working with someone on their budget in a mission driven organization, you're generally working with someone on the program team, if you will, someone that's uh, I'll use New School as an example. They were previously high school principals, for example, or working within a school district. So they have a very different way of thinking about money and budgeting. And
Sure.
so recognizing kind of where people are and their understanding of the whole budgeting process, and making sure that you're supporting them is a key to being successful running budgets in nonprofits. It's also really helpful if you yourself are bought in on the mission. I've always sought out organizations that are doing things that are also personally meaningful to me, because then I feel so much more engaged in the success of the organization, and want to make sure that the numbers that I'm putting together are really contributing to the success of the mission of the organization.
I think that's great advice, whether you're part of for profit or not for profit, is right. You really do want to buy into where you're working, want to
Right.
believe in what they're doing. It makes it easier to get up and go to work. But I think, especially so in a not for profit, if you're supporting something you don't really believe in and they have this cause, I think that would create even greater challenges than necessarily in a for profit, just because of the nature and often the passion you see in those type of organizations.
Right, definitely.
That makes a lot of sense. So, as you know, this episode came about. Someone had reached out to me asking, saying, "Hey, have you had anyone on that's not for profit?" And I was like, "I haven't." They're like, "Can you?" It sounded like they're kind of struggling with, I think a little bit of budgeting and forecasting and just providing good FP&A support for their company. So, any advice you would offer to somebody out there that might be in that situation, not for profit and just struggling a little bit with how to manage FP&A for their organization?
Again, a lot of it, I think, it could happen in a for-profit as well as a nonprofit. The staying organized and really trying to focus on a mantra I've used for many years called one version of the truth. I feel like this happens in a lot of organizations, just the proliferation of spreadsheets. There's a spreadsheet for this, a spreadsheet for that, 18 different spreadsheets to track revenue. So that organization and lens that an FP&A person brings of trying to make sure that there is one version of the truth and not 18 different versions of the truth, in kind of bringing their analysis together, is something that I certainly subscribe to and work with many of my clients on, sort of making sure there's a system, a CRM system for tracking donors or earned income. There's the solid information coming out of their HRIS systems, and in tracking, new employees and things of that sort. So that's really key. I mean, I'll also point back to just the technical nature, kind of what we were discussing before about revenue recognition and restrictions. That is a key difference. That taking a class on that, taking a seminar just on restricted revenue, kind of how to track grants in that detailed way when a funder does require it, would be a good thing for someone that's not as familiar with nonprofits to kind of brush up on before before jumping in and working at a nonprofit, for example.
Got it. So if I'm hearing you right, a couple things that came to mind for me is one, like you said, just the importance of understanding the restrictions on money. If you don't know anything about them, take a seminar, do some research, take a class, whatever, but bring yourself up to speed. And the second, I really liked how you called it one version of the truth, focusing on the systems and the data so that you can tell a good story, so you can understand what your numbers are and everybody can be on the same page. Because I'm almost positive everybody listening has worked for that company or multiple companies where it's a mess. And you get into a meeting and, well, I have this number and I have this number. And it's like, all right, well, this meeting isn't going to go anywhere.
Yeah, yeah. And I will say, I mean, I know many of us use Excel. We default to Excel, for as our main budgeting tool. I have definitely been in that boat because of its flexibility and all of the great things that Excel brings. But just the proliferation of spreadsheets can be dangerous and confusing, and everyone sort of has a different idea of what's going on. So, you know, many nonprofits, kind of going back to organizations that try and keep overhead down, one of the last systems that actually gets implemented is like a true budgeting and forecasting software. Yep. So, I've been looking into those, but it's hard to justify, when you absolutely have to have a general ledger and you have to, the next system that generally gets rolled out is the CRM, to make sure that you're tracking incoming funds. Yep. So from that system standpoint, it's not one that gets prioritized. So that means that there's more kind of danger in the forecasting and budgeting space of everyone kind of having their own spreadsheet going on.
Sure. Yeah, that can definitely be a challenge. We've all been there with the proliferation of spreadsheets. So I could see that. And yeah, you got limited funds and when do you invest in it? Right.
Yeah,
it's always
exactly.
a challenge. So, this is kind of changing subjects a little bit, but on your website, I noticed that you called yourself, I believe it was, you described yourself as a numbers nerd. Why is that? What is it that you love about numbers? Where's that passion come from?
Yeah. Yes. Numbers nerd, a badge I wear proudly.
I do as well. So I get it.
I mean, I feel like even back in grade school and high school, I just loved math, and it was because there was a right answer, the clarity in having a right answer that I could get to, I could figure out. I loved, of course, as I've gotten older and more mature, the complexity of the world and the universe, has creeped in. So I know that sometimes you don't have the clarity of the right answer. They still provide, however, the comfort, when you can go in and do an analysis, see what the past is telling you. You can roll up that analysis. It's the clarity in that is comforting. Where I have had to unwind, some of those aspects of my youth, and always kind of driving toward the right answer, is also recognizing the complexity, and especially when you start to think about forward looking, all the different scenarios that could play out. It is not as simple as completing a math equation and coming out with what is the truth. So I've had to integrate that more as I've matured. But numbers do still give me a lot of comfort and joy in being able to organize and analyze information.
Love it. And yes, when you're little, there's always that right answer. And kind of funny story on that is I had an accountant that I really enjoyed working with, and I needed a financial analyst. And I asked him if he was interested. No. He goes, that's just all funny math. He's like, you're just making numbers up and seeing if they're right. He's like, I like knowing what the answer is. Like, I'll stay as an accountant. I'm good. And I just kind of laughed because he just loved the fact that you could tie it out and everything would balance. And he just didn't want to deal with all that ambiguity, uncertainty. It just didn't fit his personality. So I just said that. It kind of made me think a little bit of when he told me that. Because I was like, all right, well, that makes sense. Well, then you stay where you're at because I like the job you do.
Yes, yes. Yeah, yeah, it's good for people to recognize that. I know the differences. I certainly love it when I'm in the actuals and I'm tying things out, or I can get close and then I use my favorite word. It's immaterial. It's an immaterial difference. I don't have to figure out what that last $25 is.
Yes.
But yeah, then thinking about forward looking and all of the different scenarios that can play out. I mean, one of the things I'll also say is, like, the minute that you get a budget approved, it's out of date because life is happening, and
Mhm.
something different is going to happen that's going to cause your budget to be wrong, and that's okay.
Yep. It's like a famous guy George Bach said, it's not about budgets, but it would apply. He said, all models are wrong, some are useful.
Yeah, right. I
You
love
know?
that.
Same is true for budgets. I haven't found a budget yet that's right.
Yeah. If you produce a budget to actuals with zero variance, you have done something wrong. Or
Yeah, exactly. So, as you look back over your career, what's the accomplishment you're most proud of and why?
yeah, well, I was excited that you mentioned it earlier in the podcast. B corporations. So as I was thinking about my career, one of the things I am most proud of is taking Revolution Foods, the healthy school lunch company, through their first B Corporation certification. So it like you, I follow B Corps often now when I'm thinking about who I want to bank with, or different things I'm going to buy, or vendors I'm recommending to my nonprofits for using. I look at if they're a certified B Corp, just because the work that they do to make sure that organizations are, not only for-profit organizations, they're not only focused on profit, but also focused on sort of this multi-stakeholder view, paying employees a living wage, having a, smaller environmental footprint, things of that sort. I was very proud to be on the front lines of that for Revolution Foods about 12 years ago now. And I've loved seeing the world of B Corps grow.
That's awesome. And before I started my own business, that's really where I wanted to work. I didn't get the opportunity. I'd applied for some jobs with the B Corp and just always really appreciated what they do. So I think that's awesome. You got that opportunity to go through that process. Any maybe key takeaways from that, like from the process that you could tell us about?
Yeah, yeah. Well, it was definitely I mean, a key takeaway, it was not easy, nor should it be, right? It was very detailed, and I think even since then, because I believe Revolution Foods was definitely on the early side of the B Corp movement. I believe it's gotten more rigorous, and they have you. I can't remember if it's annual or every few years. Sort of continue to report up. Um, but at the end of the day, it sort of served as a great third party template for us to use as to how the organization wanted to grow and scale and manage its business, going forward. So that was great to kind of have that external resource and template to say this is kind of best practice. So I would encourage, if anyone's interested, to at least look at their metrics, and then that can kind of serve as a way for you to organize your reporting and ideals around engaging various stakeholders with your organization going forward.
Well, fun. Thank you for sharing that. So we're coming near the end of our time. So we have this section called the Get to Know You section. So you get no more than 30 seconds for each answer. We have 4 questions we'll ask you here. So the first one is, what is something interesting, something we wouldn't find online that not many people know about you?
Yeah, yeah. This is a fun one. So I was thinking about this just last week. I was prepping a budget for a new client of mine, and not many people know that when I'm doing kind of deep budgeting work, focused work, I have to have rock music playing. In particular, Metallica seems to really work for me. So I love all kinds of music, but it has to be, something that it really gets my blood going when I'm doing modeling and kind of, setting up someone's forecast tool. Metallica's albums really seem to work well for me.
Not gonna lie, I wouldn't have guessed that. So that's a good
Yeah,
one. I
yeah.
don't see you as someone rocking out to Metallica, but I like it. That's fun.
I'm a, Gen Xer, 90s, so, music fan. So yeah, that in particular works for me. It was funny because I was done with my modeling and I turned it off. I switched to another task, and then I was like, oh, I can't listen to Metallica anymore. I have to switch gears to something a little lighter because it only comes up when I'm kind of deep into forecasting and budgeting.
That's funny. Yeah, I'm a child of the '90s as well, so I know the music well, that era. So that's fun. So if you could meet one person in the world, dead or alive, who would you meet and why?
Yeah, I have fallen down the ancestry.com hole several times where I have been trying to piece together, aspects of my history. I sort of haven't gone beyond great grandparents, unfortunately. So if I had the opportunity to meet anyone, I would love to meet uh, a relative of mine that I descended from that made the decision to leave. I believe my roots are in UK, Scotland area. So leave and come to the New World. I've been focused on kind of trying to get as far back in my ancestry history. So if I had that magical opportunity, that's who I would want to meet.
That'd be a great one. And yeah, I've done a fair amount. Haven't done much recently, but family history, my wife's done a lot as well. And it's fascinating to learn about your history and where you came from. And yeah, that'd be a great conversation. Love to have dinner with a bunch of the relatives around the table and just hear their stories and what it was like when they were alive. You gain a greater appreciation for yourself. There was a study that said, it was really interesting. I can't remember the exact details. I'd have to go find it. But the point was, those families that do the best and stay together tell stories of their family history.
Yeah,
They're some of the most well-adjusted families. They did a deep study on it. It was really interesting. That was one of the biggest predictors they found.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah.
And so that's a great one. So next one here, what is the last thing you Googled, looked up on YouTube, or we added this, asked generative AI, Bard, ChatGPT, whatever, about finance, FP&A, or Excel?
Yeah, yes. So I did use ChatGPT to the last thing I asked ChatGPT relating to work was to help lay out the pros and cons of outsourcing your finance and accounting versus keeping it in-house. It's something I've been thinking about a lot, especially if I have clients that are kind of in this growth mode of like, what are the markers, to think about outsourcing with someone like me or building an in-house team. So I think both have benefits and drawbacks. And it's interesting because my model, I know that I'm eventually going to have clients that are going to outgrow me and I'm going to help support them, in helping to build an in-house finance team or, help them hire the right folks. So that was what I thought maybe AI would have some good insights to be able to synthesize for me.
And how did it do?
It was so high level.
Yeah, that's often the challenge.
Yeah. I mean, there were lots of bullet points, like 2 pages, and I was like, okay, this is all pretty like. At the end of the day, it was like outsource if you want to, or keep them in house if you want to. I was like, all right, this is not very helpful.
Yeah, sometimes I've had a few like that as well. I could relate. So this is probably one of my favorite questions to ask. We've asked this since the very beginning. I think it's the only one we've asked pretty much every episode. Favorite thing about Excel, function or feature?
Yeah. So I'm going to go historical on this one too. I don't know. It's embarrassing to admit that like I still remember this moment, which was over 20 years ago when I deconstructed the VLOOKUP.
I knew you were going to go VLOOKUP because anyone who goes historic gets VLOOKUP.
Well, it was transformative. I mean, it took something that was taking me an hour to do, and all of a sudden I can do it in 5 minutes. I taught everybody. This was when I was a a general ledger accountant at Dreyer's. I still remember, figuring out what each input meant and like how to use it. So that it remains a favorite of mine. Even though I don't use it as much anymore, but
well, you're in good company. I think it is the number one most mentioned formula on the show.
So good.
There you go.
Yeah, I like going with the majority.
It works. So we just have 2 questions left for you. So the first is, if you could offer some advice to someone starting a career in FP&A today, what would that advice be?
Yeah, if you are starting your career now, I would say, follow your passion. Just if you know that, analyzing numbers or kind of staying in the historical, as we were talking about earlier, is comfortable for you, then do that. Many organizations need excellent accountants. If you love the scenario planning and future forecasting, focus on that. Find a great mentor. I have definitely benefited from many of the mentors I've had at every organization I've worked for, as well as the educational institutions I've had the honor of being proximate to. And I'll say to your listeners that maybe don't have much insight into nonprofits, if you're at a stage in your career where you can give back a little volunteer time, a great way to do that is joining a nonprofit board. They are volunteer positions. They always need finance people. So even if you don't know that much about nonprofit finance, you can join a board. It's a relatively low lift. You attend, quarterly meetings. You might join a finance committee and learn from the executive director, the CEO, a bit more about how their business works. And it's a great way to kind of step your toe into the nonprofit world of something that you care about. Find a local organization, that's meaningful to you. If it's an animal shelter, for example, or a school, or anything that's giving back to your community, you can help bring your FP&A brain to the table, and provide a lot of value for that nonprofit.
Great. So I like that. I love the follow your passion, and then joining a board or working for a nonprofit is a great way to learn about them. I really like that, and it's a great way to feel good, give you an opportunity to serve. So I think that's a great advice there. So last question, if someone wants to get a hold of you, if they want to reach out to you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, LinkedIn is definitely the best way. If you just search for me, Amy Omand, through LinkedIn, you can shoot me a message there. I love talking about nonprofits and thinking about the FP&A industry as a whole. It's been really fun to be following you, Paul, for the last year, and learning more from other folks in this space that are publishing great content out on LinkedIn. So you can find me there as well.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And thank you for joining us, Amy. I really enjoyed this chat and getting to know a little bit about you and being able to talk about not-for-profits. It's not something we get to do a lot on the show. So I really enjoyed it. And thanks again. You have a great day.
Thanks. You too. I really appreciate the opportunity. Have a great day.